High in the far reaches of Maine, not far from the Canadian border, lies a patchwork of farms and forests called New Sweden. Here, dirt roads twist through dense stands of spruce and birch, and the night sky is so clear you can trace constellations with your finger. It's a place where neighbors are miles apart, where silence is broken only by the wind and the call of an owl. In the autumn of 2024, this quiet corner of the world became the backdrop for a mystery that still haunts everyone who knows it. Welcome to Long Story True Crime, where we dive deep into the most intriguing disappearances and unresolved mysteries. Here, we take the time to tell each story with care and detail, honoring the people at the heart of these cases. If you're captivated by thoughtful, long-form storytelling and want to help keep these stories alive, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We'd love to have you join our community as we search for truth together. Stephanie Earlene Jan Dameron entered the world on October 6, 2010, into a family that would become her entire universe. She was the third of 6 siblings, a middle child whose identity was inextricably tied to the clan she grew up with. Her parents, Lisa and Dale, were dreamers with a restless streak. They moved their children from place to place, West Virginia to Texas, Texas to Illinois, Illinois to Maine, in search of a life that matched their ideals. By the time Stephanie was 9, the Damerons had settled deep in the woods of New Sweden, Maine. They bought 26 acres of raw land and constructed a dome-shaped home on it, a geodesic structure built with their own hands. Their off-grid lifestyle meant there was no municipal water or electricity. The family drew their water from a nearby stream and powered their lights and appliances with a generator that hummed in the yard. They heated their home with wood they chopped themselves and bathed by heating water on the stove. This way of living created a childhood unlike that of most American teenagers. Stephanie did not wake up to the buzz of school buses and the chatter of classmates. Instead, mornings began with the sounds of the forest and the voices of her siblings. Lisa and Dale homeschooled all 6 of their children, teaching them basic reading, writing, and arithmetic at the kitchen table. There were no class field trips, no science labs, or chorus concerts. With no internet connection and limited electricity, their curriculum relied on workbooks and textbooks, and much of their practical education came from living off the land. The children learned to grow vegetables, tend animals, and split firewood. They spent hours outside, exploring the acreage that surrounded them, forging their own adventures among the trees. Isolation was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the Damerons forged a close-knit bond. They played board games, built forts, and spent evenings reading by lamplight. On the other hand, Stephanie lacked the social interactions that most young people take for granted. She didn't join sports teams or attend birthday parties. She didn't have neighbors her own age within walking distance. According to her mother, she had no friends outside the family. The siblings were each other's companions, for better or for worse, and disagreements could feel amplified within the closed system of their home. Living far from town also meant that community events, libraries, and extracurricular activities were seldom attended. When the family did venture into town, it was usually for supplies or an occasional outing, not to drop the kids off for playdates. These conditions shaped Stephanie's character in distinct ways. Family photos and descriptions from those who knew her paint a picture of a girl who found joy in small things. She loved bright colors, purple and blue were her favorites, and she often incorporated them into her clothing. At holiday gatherings, she might wear a playful headband with cat ears, giving her an air of whimsy and fun. Her playful side was most evident in the candid moments captured on the family's awareness website. Stephanie laughing with a sibling while they decorated a small Christmas tree, Stephanie feeding chickens with a look of concentration. She had a gentle demeanor with animals and a willingness to help with chores around their self-sufficient homestead. The forest that surrounded her home was both her playground and her refuge. To Stephanie, the woods were not a dark unknown. They were familiar paths, moss-covered rocks, and the comforting scent of pine. In the spring, she and her siblings would look for signs of new life, baby squirrels, wildflowers pushing up through last year's leaves. In summer, they chased each other along deer trails and waded through shallow streams to cool off. Autumn brought crisp air and the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, and Stephanie loved to watch as the canopy transformed from green to fiery reds and oranges. Winter, though harsh, offered its own magic, silence, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch under heavy snow, animal tracks crisscrossing the white ground, and the warm glow of their wood stove as they warmed up after sledding. Whenever emotions ran high in the Dameron household, Stephanie often sought solace among the trees.
If she felt overwhelmed by a disagreement or simply needed space to think, she would step into her boots, grab her coat, and head down a trail she knew by heart. Walking under the interlaced branches, she could clear her mind. The whisper of the wind through the pines and the rhythmic crunch of her steps on the forest floor offered a calm that was hard to find in the close quarters of their home. In those moments, she would sit on a fallen log or lean against a tree, watching sunlight filter through leaves and letting her thoughts settle. Sometimes she would return with treasures, an oddly shaped rock, a particularly beautiful pine cone, a wildflower to press between the pages of a book. Other times, she would return empty-handed, but lighter in spirit. Imagining Stephanie in those woods, one can see why she felt safe there. The forest was a place where she could be alone without feeling lonely. It gave her room to breathe, to process her feelings, and to escape the constant presence of her siblings. For a girl with no social outlets outside her family, nature offered a form of freedom. It's easy to picture her walking through a tunnel of trees, her boots leaving faint prints on the path, as she worked through whatever conflict had upset her. In her mind, the woods were home just as much as the dome they lived in. She likely knew which trees creaked in the wind, where small streams meandered, and where the path curved just so. She may have whispered her secrets to the wind and listened for an answer in the rustling leaves. Stephanie's playful personality shone through in spite of the constraints of her upbringing. She enjoyed dressing up in colorful outfits, sometimes adding a touch of sparkle to her otherwise practical wardrobe. She relished holiday traditions, decorating their home with homemade crafts and helping her younger siblings wrap small gifts. She was known to hum or sing softly to herself while doing chores, her voice carrying into the yard. Her favorite songs were a mix of country and pop tunes that she heard on the rare occasions the family listened to the radio. When her older siblings teased her, she often responded with a good-natured eye roll or a laugh, not taking their jokes to heart. Her bond with her parents was complicated by the family's strict insular lifestyle. Lisa and Dale believed in raising their children away from what they saw as negative influences. They controlled the children's media consumption, limited their access to technology, and insisted that their way of life protected them. Stephanie trusted her parents and leaned on them for guidance. But as she approached her teenage years, she may have also felt the stirrings of independence. In many families, adolescence is marked by expanding boundaries and new experiences. For Stephanie, the boundaries remained largely the same, defined by the tree line. Her increasing need for autonomy sometimes clashed with the reality of their isolated life. Despite these challenges, Stephanie found ways to express herself. She experimented with her hair, sometimes braiding it or tying it back with ribbons in her favorite shades. She loved animals and often talked about wanting to work with them when she grew up. When the family once traveled to a nearby town for a festival, she was captivated by the sight of horses pulling wagons, their shiny coats catching the sunlight. Back home, she would imitate the way the horses lifted their heads proudly, walking around the yard as if leading a parade. Her imagination was boundless, and she often entertained her younger siblings with elaborate stories she made up on the spot, weaving in characters inspired by the creatures of the forest and the books they had in their small collection. This portrait of Stephanie paints a picture of a young girl who was both sheltered and resilient, isolated yet imaginative. Her life was defined by family and nature, routine and occasional moments of freedom. The woods were not just a backdrop to her story, they were a character in it. They held her secrets, gave her comfort, and ultimately became the place she would go on a day that changed everything. Understanding the rhythms of her daily life and the role the forest played in it helps explain why, after that argument over chores, she would instinctively walk toward the trees. For Stephanie, the path into the woods was the path to calm, and, tragically, the path on which she vanished.
It was a Tuesday, and the first hints of autumn were settling over New Sweden. On the morning of September 23, 2024, the Dameron household stirred to life as it always did. The generator hummed to a start, a fire crackled in the wood stove, and the smell of frying eggs filled the dome. Stephanie helped her younger siblings with their breakfasts and the morning chores. Her parents, Lisa and Dale, planned to drive into town that day to apply for jobs at a local business. Work had been sporadic since their move to Maine, and any steady income would be a relief. By midday, Lisa and Dale had loaded two of their children into their vehicle. One of them was their youngest, who still needed constant supervision, and set off down the half-mile road that led from their home to the main route. They left 4 children at the house: Stephanie, her 19-year-old sister, a younger brother, and another sister. Richard, the longtime family friend who had lived with the Damerons for years, stayed behind to keep an eye on them. He was outside, working on a maintenance project near the house when the argument began. No one remembers exactly what sparked it, just that it was about chores, part of the daily push and pull in a crowded household. Stephanie and her older sister disagreed over who was supposed to do what. Voices were raised, frustration flared. For most families, such a disagreement would pass quickly and be forgotten. But for Stephanie, who was on the brink of her teenage years and feeling the usual swells of emotion, it felt heavier. She had always been sensitive to conflict. In the confined space of their dome home, there was no place to escape except outside. Shortly after 2 p.m., in the heat of the argument, Stephanie went to a room, pulled on a long-sleeved blue shirt and her sturdy Harley-Davidson boots, and stepped onto the porch. Richard saw her go. He later recalled that her eyes were wet with tears, but that she didn't slam the door or shout. She simply left, heading toward the tree line and following a familiar path into the woods. No one ran after her. This had happened before. She would sometimes take a walk to cool down, wandering through the pines until her heart rate slowed and her thoughts untangled. She always came back within an hour or two. Minutes after Stephanie disappeared from view, those still in the house heard the low rumble of an engine on the narrow road that led to their property. The Dameron farm sat deep in the forest, and passing vehicles were rare. The sound could have been anything: a pickup, a logging truck, an ATV. The trees muffled the noise, and no one thought to check until it had passed. When Richard and one of the children went to the end of the driveway a few minutes later, there was nothing to see. No vehicle, no tire tracks that weren't already there. In a household with limited resources and no immediate neighbors, the possibility that someone might be driving around unannounced was disconcerting, but with Stephanie still assumed to be nearby, it didn't set off alarms. Around 3 p.m., Lisa received a text message from her oldest daughter. "Mom, Steph walked out after we argued. She hasn't come back yet." Lisa and Dale were still at their appointment in town. They messaged back, telling the kids not to worry and to look for her along the usual trails. They finished their paperwork, climbed back into the car, and started the drive home, expecting to find Stephanie sitting on the porch swing or chopping kindling when they arrived. Instead, when the parents returned about an hour later, they were met with anxious faces. Stephanie was nowhere to be seen. Richard and the children had already walked through the woods near the house, calling her name and checking the places she liked to sit when she was upset. They hadn't gone far, not wanting to leave the younger children alone. Now that Lisa and Dale were home, the search expanded. Dale and Richard trekked down the path she usually took, then veered off into the thicker underbrush. Lisa stayed behind, keeping an eye on the younger kids and occasionally walking down the road calling out. The family assumed she had gone deeper into the woods than usual, but would soon respond to their voices. In the late afternoon, the sky darkened with heavy clouds, and the temperature dropped. Rain began to fall, not a downpour, but a steady drizzle that dampened clothes and made the ground slick. As the light faded, the Damerons pulled on headlamps and grabbed flashlights, continuing their search until it was too dark to see more than a few feet ahead. They returned to the house, cold and wet, hoping Stephanie had found shelter and would stumble back in once the rain stopped. That night, the family slept little. Lisa lay awake, listening for footsteps on the porch. Every rustle of wind, every creak of the dome made her sit up in bed. At some point, she got up and walked the property lines again, shining her flashlight into the woods and whispering her daughter's name. Richard lay fully clothed on the couch, boots by the door, ready to rush outside if he heard anything. By morning, reality began to set in. The rain had stopped, and the woods were shrouded in mist. There was still no sign of Stephanie. The family split up once more, retracing their steps, checking the shallow streams and fallen logs where she might have tripped. They looked for footprints or broken twigs. They found nothing. At 9 a.m. on September 24, Lisa made the call she had hoped to avoid. She dialed the police and reported her 13-year-old daughter missing. Within an hour, Maine State Police arrived. They interviewed the family, recorded the timeline of events, and began organizing a search. The officers asked the same questions Lisa and Dale had been asking themselves all night. Had Stephanie ever run away before? Did she have friends she might be visiting? Did she have a phone or money? The answers were all no. Yes, she had walked off before, but she had always come back. No, she didn't have friends outside the family. No, she didn't own a phone. The only unusual thing anyone could point to was the vehicle heard on the road shortly after she left. The search that began that day would grow to include hundreds of volunteers, dogs, drones, and helicopters. But on the morning of September 24, it was still just a family and a handful of officers combing through wet leaves and tall grass, calling into the trees. Stephanie had been gone for less than 24 hours, yet she seemed to have vanished without a trace. As search and rescue teams fanned out, her family was left with only questions and the agonizing knowledge that the small window during which missing children are most often found alive was closing quickly. The events of those 24 hours, an argument, a walk into the woods, the hum of an unseen engine, would be picked apart and replayed over and over again in the months to come, each detail scrutinized for meaning. For the Damerons, it would be the longest day of their lives, the day when everything changed.
By the afternoon of September 24, uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives descended on the Dameron property. Word that a young girl was missing from the New Sweden woods spread quickly through law enforcement channels. Within hours, search teams began to assemble at a makeshift command post, a clearing near the family's dome home, where maps could be spread out and radios could be distributed. Men and women in blaze-orange vests and boots laced tight pored over topographic maps, outlining search grids across acres of pines, bogs, and logging roads. The Maine Warden Service, accustomed to rescuing hunters and hikers in treacherous terrain, took the lead. They divided the land into squares and assigned teams to each, ensuring that no stretch of ground went unexamined. Canine units were among the first assets deployed. Highly trained dogs sniffed clothing worn by Stephanie to capture her scent and then set off into the underbrush, handlers following close behind. The dogs pushed through thickets of spruce and waded through streams, their noses low to the ground, their tails wagging when they picked up a trail. They circled back repeatedly, doubling and tripling their paths to make sure they had not missed anything. Helicopters buzzed overhead, pilots scanning for any sign of bright fabric or movement among the trees. As the hours wore on, drones took to the sky too, small, nimble devices equipped with cameras that could fly low over boggy areas where humans could not easily tread. Searchers marked their progress with flagging tape tied to branches, creating a web of neon pink and orange that crisscrossed the forest. They checked around fallen trees, under overhangs, and inside the root cavities of overturned stumps where a child might seek shelter. They peered into culverts and down old well shafts. Cadaver dogs were brought in to scent for human remains in water and marshy areas, just in case tragedy had already struck. The teams didn't just look for Stephanie herself. They looked for any clue, a scrap of fabric, a broken twig, a boot print, even a candy wrapper that might indicate she had passed through. The search expanded far beyond the Dameron property. Neighboring landowners gave permission for officers to comb their fields and woods. Volunteers from the community, including experienced hunters and members of local search and rescue groups, joined in. They understood the landscape intimately and guided law enforcement to beaver ponds, ravines, and old trails that weren't on the map. Farmers' fields were searched row by row, swamp grass was trampled down, and every barn and shed in the area was opened and checked. Searchers worked from dawn until dusk for days on end. They endured rain, wind, and chilly night temperatures. Each night, exhausted and often chilled to the bone, they regrouped at the command post to plan the next day's search. Despite the exhaustive effort, nothing appeared, not a single sign of a 13-year-old girl wandering through the woods. The dogs returned without indicating a find. Drone footage showed only endless expanses of green and brown. Volunteers began to whisper to one another about how odd it was that they had found nothing at all. Law enforcement, too, grew increasingly concerned. They had expected at least a discarded boot or some sign of a struggle. The absence of evidence was a clue in itself, and it fueled new questions. 2 days into the search, the Maine State Police announced that they had requested assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. New Sweden sits roughly 20 miles from the Canadian border, and abductions in border areas are automatically flagged for potential interstate or international complications. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived quietly but decisively, setting up their own resources alongside local law enforcement. These specialists, drawn from across the country, brought expertise in child abductions, behavioral analysis, and evidence collection. They interviewed the Dameron family at length, but gently but thoroughly, to confirm timelines and relationships. They reached out to registered sex offenders in the area, checked the backgrounds of neighbors, and built a profile of the terrain and potential suspects. The federal agents also took over the digital aspects of the investigation. Although Stephanie did not have her own phone, there were reports that she occasionally borrowed an old flip phone to check social media. Agents subpoenaed records from cell towers and internet providers, searching for any electronic footprint that could indicate communication with someone outside her immediate circle. They sorted through tips that flooded in, from psychics, from armchair detectives, and from well-meaning strangers who thought they had seen a girl who looked like Stephanie at a convenience store hundreds of miles away. Each tip was logged, prioritized, and checked. None led anywhere. In early December, nearly 3 months after Stephanie vanished, the FBI held a press conference with the Maine State Police. Standing under a bank of microphones in the cold, an assistant special agent in charge announced that the Bureau was offering a reward of up to $15,000 for information that would lead to Stephanie's safe return or the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. The official stated that while Stephanie had been known to walk off before, there was no evidence she had run away this time, and that nothing in the investigation had been ruled out. Cameras flashed as reporters asked about leads and suspects, and behind them, posters with Stephanie's face, green eyes, shoulder-length brown hair, fluttered in the wind. The reward notice was shared widely across social media and in local news. Flyers were posted in grocery stores, post offices, and libraries throughout Maine and into neighboring states. "Have you seen Stephanie Dameron?" the posters asked, alongside the promise of anonymity for anyone who came forward. Still, no credible information surfaced. Months turned into a year, and the search operation shifted from exhaustive grid sweeps to targeted efforts based on sporadic leads. The case remained open, the reward unclaimed, and the eerie fact remained: hundreds of people, dozens of dogs, and the full might of state and federal authorities had scoured the area without turning up even a shoe. As one veteran searcher put it, "It's like she vanished into thin air," a sentiment that left everyone unsettled and determined to find the truth.
As days turned into weeks with no sign of Stephanie, the absence of answers gave rise to the one thing no family wants: questions with no easy resolution. The timeline of her disappearance was deceptively simple: an argument, a walk into the woods, a hum of an unseen engine. Yet that simplicity masked a labyrinth of possibilities. Each theory carried its own implications and uncertainties, and none came with evidence strong enough to settle the matter. Investigators and armchair detectives alike have examined 3 broad possibilities. The first and most benign is that Stephanie chose to run away. Those who lean toward this explanation point out that she had walked off before when she was upset, and that the argument with her sister might have been the final straw in a life that offered her little social freedom. Adolescence brings a natural desire for independence, and living in an isolated, off-grid household could have made that desire burn brighter. Some speculate that she may have arranged to meet someone, possibly someone she encountered on social media during secret sessions with a borrowed phone, and that the engine heard on the road was that person picking her up. But there are significant holes in the runaway theory. Stephanie left with no money, no identification, and no change of clothes. She was not known to have any close friends or contacts outside the family, and she lacked the transportation or resources to get very far on her own. The night she disappeared, temperatures dropped and rain fell steadily, conditions that would have been dangerous for a young girl camping out alone. If her plan was to run away and start anew, it would have been a perilous and poorly equipped attempt. The second possibility is that Stephanie suffered an accident in the woods. The terrain around her home is rugged and unforgiving. Hidden sinkholes, thick bogs, and fast-moving streams can challenge even experienced outdoors people. She might have taken a wrong turn, fallen and been unable to call for help. She might have slipped into a body of water or become trapped in dense brush. While this scenario seems plausible, given her familiarity with the woods and the fact that she often went there to calm herself, it is undercut by the exhaustive search that followed. Search teams covered every inch of ground within miles of her home, using cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains even when submerged in water. Helicopters and drones scanned from above. If Stephanie had been lost or injured nearby, the chances are high that some trace of her would have been found. Footprints, clothing, broken branches, a disturbed animal den. The complete lack of physical evidence makes an accident feel both probable and improbable at the same time. The third and most unsettling theory is that Stephanie was abducted. The idea that someone could have driven up that secluded road at the exact moment she left the house seems like a coincidence too cruel to be true, yet it is not impossible. New Sweden lies within a short drive of the Canadian border, and the remote region has long stretches of road where one could disappear without being seen. The sound of the engine shortly after she disappeared remains unexplained. It could have been a neighbor or a passerby. It could have been someone who knew the family's routine or noticed Stephanie leaving alone. Abduction could have been opportunistic or premeditated. Supporters of this theory note that the FBI's quick involvement suggests investigators considered foul play a realistic scenario. But here, too, there are problems. No one reported seeing a suspicious vehicle, and there have been no credible sightings of Stephanie anywhere else in the country. No ransom call was ever made, and no digital footprints have connected her to an unknown individual. As time passes, the abduction theory lingers because it is the only one that accommodates the complete lack of evidence on the family's property. In truth, investigators say no theory has been ruled out. Maine State Police and the FBI have avoided publicly leaning toward any one explanation. They have repeatedly cautioned against online speculation that veers into conspiracy or blames Stephanie's family without proof. Law enforcement officials emphasize that every tip is investigated and every possibility remains on the table. For the Damerons, the theories bring little comfort. Runaway suggests their daughter chose to leave them. Accident implies she died alone in the woods near home, undiscovered despite their best efforts. Abduction conjures images too painful to fully contemplate. Each theory ends in a question mark. Each leaves a family suspended between hope and despair. The investigators' careful neutrality may frustrate those who crave closure, but it also reflects a commitment to finding the truth rather than settling on an easy narrative.
3 months after Stephanie walked into the woods and didn't return, New Sweden's First Baptist Church filled with the soft glow of candles and the muted rustle of winter coats. Snow lay in thick drifts outside, muffling the sound of arriving cars. Inside, friends, neighbors, and strangers took seats in the pews, many dressed in shades of purple and blue. Those are Stephanie's favorite colors, and they had become symbols of solidarity for a girl most of them had never met. Some attendees wore ribbons, others donned scarves or hats in violet hues. At the front of the church, a table held framed photographs of Stephanie smiling at different ages, alongside a simple arrangement of evergreen branches and pine cones gathered from the surrounding woods. The vigil had been organized by members of the community who refused to let the case fade into obscurity. They wanted to remind the family that they were not alone and to keep Stephanie's face in the public eye. As the pastor opened the evening with a prayer, the murmur of whispered greetings settled into silence. People wrote letters to Stephanie, slipping them into a wooden box that would later be placed at the foot of the church's Christmas tree. Parents held their children close, imagining what it would be like to be in Lisa and Dale's place. A volunteer read aloud a few of the notes, expressions of hope that she was safe, memories shared by those who had glimpsed her around town, and pleas for her to come home. Music played quietly over the church's sound system, songs that Stephanie liked to hum while doing chores. The simple melodies filled the space with warmth. After the formal part of the vigil, the organizers invited anyone who wished to speak to step forward. Some shared stories of their own missing loved ones and how community support had sustained them. Others, including Stephanie's relatives, spoke of her kindness and the way her absence had left a void in their lives. Tears flowed freely, but so did determination. Candlelight flickered as people promised to keep looking, keep sharing, keep hoping. Beyond the walls of the church, the effort to find Stephanie continued on screens and social media feeds. Online campaigns sprang up. A website called Finding Stephanie Dameron
compiled updates from law enforcement, posted photos, and coordinated volunteer efforts. Another page, Letters to Stephanie, encouraged people to write messages of love and support, which would be periodically delivered to the family. On Facebook and local forums, users changed their profile pictures to Stephanie's missing poster and used hashtags with her name. They shared news articles, reward flyers, and videos about her case. Hundreds of people joined groups dedicated to spreading awareness, each member vowing to keep the story alive. There were calls for anyone with even the smallest piece of information to contact the authorities, and reminders that the $15,000 reward was still on the table for tips that led to her safe return. Local businesses added signs to their windows, and gas stations taped flyers to their pumps. At community events, fairs, holiday gatherings, farmers markets, tables were set up with stacks of missing person posters for people to take and distribute. Even as months turned into a year, the momentum did not completely fade. Whenever an anniversary approached, the 100-day mark, Stephanie's 14th birthday, new waves of posts and prayers appeared online. Volunteers wrote letters to news outlets and true crime podcasts, asking them to cover the case. They hoped that fresh eyes on the story might jog someone's memory or encourage a witness to come forward. Each small act was an affirmation that Stephanie mattered, and that, in a place as remote as New Sweden, the community's collective voice could carry far beyond the tree line.
As the seasons turned and the colors of New Sweden's forests shifted from green to gold to white and back again, the emptiness left by Stephanie Damron's disappearance only grew more pronounced. Her absence wasn't just a line in a police report or a post on social media, it was an empty chair at a dinner table, a birthday celebration without the guest of honor, a mother staring at the edge of the woods and willing her daughter to appear. It was siblings who no longer had their middle sister to mediate quarrels or join in whispered jokes. It was a community that had lost a sense of security and was forced to confront the thin line between everyday life and sudden tragedy. When we tell stories like Stephanie's, it can be easy to let the mystery eclipse the human being at its center. But Stephanie was more than a set of clues and theories. She was a girl who loved wearing purple and blue, who cared for animals and made up stories for her younger siblings. She found peace walking among the trees and watching sunlight filter through leaves. She celebrated holidays, laughed at small jokes, and had dreams for the future. She would have turned 14 just 2 weeks after she went missing. Instead of planning a party, her family held a vigil and prayed for her safe return. No matter which theory seems most plausible, the truth is that a family's life was shattered in the space of an afternoon. The uncertainty they endure is a unique kind of grief, one that leaves room for hope even as it wears on the spirit. In the face of that, the rest of us have a choice: to turn the page and move on to the next headline, or to keep caring long after the initial wave of attention has passed. Empathy isn't more than a feeling, it's a commitment not to let someone else's pain be forgotten. If Stephanie's story has touched you, there are tangible ways to help. Share her name and photo on social media, especially if you live near northern Maine or across the Canadian border. Print out a flyer and post it on a community bulletin board. Talk about her case with friends and family. Remind them that missing persons are not statistics, but individuals with loved ones who ache for answers. Most importantly, if you know something, anything that could help, no matter how small or unrelated it seems, contact the Maine State Police at 207-532-5400 or the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can submit tips anonymously, and sometimes it's the smallest detail that unlocks a mystery. We also invite you to support our work. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others. Your engagement helps keep cases like Stephanie's in the public eye and encourages more people to come forward. Together, we can honor her humanity, support her family, and hopefully bring her home.